How's it going, everyone, and welcome to 4MR Ranch. Today I'm excited to be sharing with you another Nightvision optic review. This one happens to be the Accufire Noctis TR1. So with any of my electro-optic reviews, obviously there's a lot to get into, so right away I'm going to go ahead and put out there, check the description below. There's going to be different timestamps to all the different categories we're going to be covering. So I'm obviously going to show you what's included with this optic. I'll do a basic orientation to the features and controls of this optic. Of course, I got to give you some both daytime and nighttime sample footage. I'll then do a complete walkthrough of the menu of this optic, and I will show you a walkthrough of the app. So spoiler alert, one of the features of this optic, it does have an app functionality as well. And then I have been using this optic now for roughly 5 months, so I have quite a bit of thoughts on it and some based on my experiences, both good and bad, that I will share as well. Other than that, I do want to go ahead and just disclose this optic was provided to me by Accufire, and my relationship with them is that every now and then they do reach out to me asking if I want to provide an honest collection of my thoughts and opinions to you guys in the form of a review, and that's what this is going to be, my complete unbiased thoughts and opinions. So full disclosure, they did provide this optic to me. They didn't offer me any money to put this video together. That being said, they do understand that gun tubers like myself struggle these days. So I do have a promo code, discount code 4MR, which will save you 5%. It does also give me some kickbacks if any sales are made. So just wanted to be transparent on that. So if you are interested in this, you will get 5% off or anything on their website, such as their Atro 20 and Incendus that I now regularly use for some hog hunts. You will save 5%. It will help my channel, but I will not advocate for you to purchase anything that I would not want to own myself. So just putting all that out there. That was a lot right out of the gate, but let's go ahead and dive into the Noctis TR1 review. So just talking about some tech specs, this is, like I said, both a daytime and nighttime capable optic. It's digital night vision, which means you don't have to worry about burning the analog tubes like you do with analog night vision. You are good to use this in the bright sunlight. It is a 3.2 to 22 power digital zoom. So if you do want to crank it all the way to 22 power, it's not going to zoom in optically like a standard rifle scope. It will be digital, so you'll lose a little bit of resolution. It'll get a little bit pixelated, but all in all, it'll help you make more precise shooting. You'll still be able to tell what you're aiming at. And that is true for most electro optics. They're not going to be optical zooming. They're going to zoom in on the sensor within the optic itself. So this one does allow you to go from 3.5 all the way to 22 power, so very versatile. And that view is going to come through a 60mm front objective lens, and it's going to be displayed on a 1024 by 768 OLED display within the optic, which you can view with a 52mm eye relief, which is roughly 2 inches. And not to get into my thoughts and opinions just yet, but I will say, in my experience, that 52mm advertisement is very accurate. It was very pleasing to sit behind. I didn't feel like I had to get too close. Never had any fears of scope eye or anything of that nature. Now, working our way into the optic, it is powered by 2 different internal batteries. So the battery is not removable, and the 2 battery cells inside will give you approximately 10 hours, give or take how you use it. And again, trying not to talk about my thoughts and experiences just yet, but I will say that is definitely an accurate advertisement there. You may get a little less than 10 hours of use if you're using it primarily during the daytime and have your internal screen brightness cranked up higher. That being said, if you're someone who's just going to pull it out of the closet or the safe to use at night and your brightness is going to be turned down a little bit so you're not blinding yourself, you can definitely expect a little over 10 hours. So 10 hours, fair assessment there. That's what I've gotten out of this optic personally, is roughly 10 hours depending on use. And this optic does come with an IPX4 weather resistance rating, and so with all those features combined and bundled up, it's going to come in at 2.3 pounds, which is really not too bad. Now, that's probably a little bit heavier than your traditional rifle scope of this form factor, but I didn't really notice it as being any heavier than a regular rifle scope when on my setup. So like I said, 2.3 pounds for all these features. I think it's definitely value added for every ounce that you are adding onto your setup. Okay, so I just want to do a real quick unboxing so you, again, kind of know what to expect if you decide to pick one of these bad boys up for yourself. So when you open up the box, the first thing you're going to be greeted by is actually going to be Accufire's Performance Guarantee, which, I always appreciate stuff like this, to know that a company actually stands behind their products. So key takeaway from this is that they're going to guarantee this scope for 3 years since it is an electro optic. So if you have any issues, they're going to replace it. And again, they stand behind their stuff. So good stuff there. And just, information on how and where to register that. So moving on, you get your microfiber cleaning cloth with their logo on it, so you can clean your front and rear objective lenses without scratching it. You do get an included Accufire branded IR illuminator. Now this one is focusable to both zoom in, or to focus and widen the beam rather. And it has a clicky tail cap on the back. This is powered by an 18650 battery cell, or 2 CR123s, which both the battery is included. Actually, they will give you a spare, but these batteries are cool that they do have a micro USB charger, which is, I think, a real neat feature there. So you can use the included charging cable, which has a tether for 4 connections at a time. Again, nice feature there. So if you want to pick up some extras, you can charge 4 of these at a time, or you can use your standard dock that I know a lot of guys have for the 18650. So some flexibility on how you potentially can charge these, which is always a good thing. And when plugged in and charging, you'll see you do get 2 little LED indicators that are red when charging, and they will go green when the batteries are full, so you know exactly when it's time to pull them off the charger. You do get a front hood so that if you're shooting into the sunlight, that'll help with some of that glare and kickback. It is threaded and removable there. A rubberized rear eye cup. So again, you can contain some of that light pollution, or if you're shooting into bright sunlight, it'll help you see that screen that much better. It is a nice flexible and soft rubber, but it doesn't feel so cheap that it's going to tear and fall apart. It actually feels pretty high quality. And finally, you do get a bracket for that IR illuminator. Essentially, this is just going to be like a 1-inch scope mount that'll fit a 1-inch tube. So this is kind of a a budget option in terms of what you can mount your IR illuminators with, but it will work. And again, right out of the box, gives you just the bare essentials to get you started. And of course, an Allen key is also conveniently provided with that as well. Now, one thing to keep in mind is, obviously you're going to have your optic, of course, in there, but to keep in mind that your scope rings are not included, so you will need to pick up a pair of 30mm scope rings, which, like I said, is not currently included with the Noctis TR1. So do keep that in mind. Okay guys, so I'm not going to talk for the sample footage too much, but I do need to come out with a caveat that I found a really weird anomaly, and I'm not sure if it has to do with the video format coming out of the scope, or it's my editing software, or just my computer in general. But for whatever reason, once I import it into my editing software and then it then gets rendered and exported, there's a lot of weird anomalies and kind of some glitchy stuff going on with this footage. That does not appear in the scope whatsoever. It actually doesn't even appear in the footage that's been downloaded to my phone. For whatever reason, whenever you see that those pixels and kind of boxy aberrations forming from movement, that is, for whatever reason, being caused in my editing software. So I do want to just state that, unfortunately, the software is not playing nicely with these video file formats. So any kind of weird stuff you're seeing is not happening in the scope whatsoever. That being said, unfortunately, this is the best way I can still demonstrate how this footage looks. So it is what it is. That's what I'm experiencing. Maybe you'll experience it too if you're someone who wants to export and share video files. Nonetheless, I just want to point that out, that does not happen in the scope whatsoever. This is an audio test. This is audio from the scope. Just so you have an idea of what it sounds like, this is a scope audio test. Now, in terms of the external controls of this object, you'll notice it's actually pretty straightforward and intuitive. So most notably, there's going to be a power button that's pretty simple. You'll simply just press and hold and the optic will fire right on. Now, the other control that's pretty obvious is going to be this dial on top. So not only is this going to allow you to select things by pressing it in, it'll also let you change by scrolling left or right and then again selecting within the menu system, which is pulled up by simply holding down this knob, and there is a tactile and audible click. As far as that, the only other external control is actually going to be the front lens does rotate, so you can adjust your parallax and make sure things are in focus nice and crisp, and the rear lens also is adjustable to the user's eye. So similar to an optical rifle scope, you can adjust things on both ends of the spectrum, which makes it very versatile. And the only other thing worth pointing out to you guys on the outside of this optic is that there is a port on the right side, which is sealed by a piece of rubber that hangs down, and it unveils the USB Type-C opening that you can plug in any standard USB Type-C charger to charge this optic up. And I will say that although this is rubber, it does not feel flimsy or like it's going to snag off very easily in the future. Okay, so here's an example of what you'll see on the main scope interface. What you'll notice is that there's two windows. The bottom window is kind of your main view. So you see that I am currently at a base magnification there, whereas the top window, I am up to 11.4 power. So what I really like about this is that you can use that top window for your first and initial shot, and the bottom window will be zoomed out for a wider field of view for follow-up shots, should you need them. Moving on, underneath the 11.4 power that's indicated on that top window, that is your range that you can manually input there. Underneath that is going to be the base magnification you're at in your larger window. So right now you can see I'm at the base magnification of 3.8 power. And underneath that is your vertical tilt. So I am looking up into the trees to give you guys something to look at. On the right hand side is the horizontal tilt, so it shows I'm not perfectly level, which again, both are very useful if you're doing any kind of long range shooting. At the top right of the screen, and you will notice if I turn the turret on the top of the scope, different things highlight in red would be your X coordinates. So if I needed to make an adjustment, it'll first prompt you to accept it so you can't easily ruin your zero. You'll see at the top of the screen how much adjustment I am making, both displayed in that top window and then the top where that X was. It's showing the correction that is being made currently. So obviously I don't want to change my zero, but essentially it'll let you compare that to any target you're shooting at so you can make your zeroing process a little bit easier. Moving underneath that, you'll see where I now have Hunt highlighted in red. If I click the top turret, it'll change to Observe, which essentially just kind of cleans up your view window so that if you want to just watch some activity, take some photos or videos without a reticle there, you can do so. Now at the very bottom of the screen, you'll see that my Wi-Fi indicator is currently telling me the Wi-Fi is on. I also have a battery life indicator. In the very bottom center, it's showing that my profile for 223 is selected. There's a moon symbol because I'm currently in night vision mode. It is after sunset when I'm looking into these trees and doing this portion of the review for you guys. So this is nighttime performance at dusk, looking through a window actually with no illumination on. And then there's a timestamp so you can better track what time it is. And again, you can set that within the Optic itself. I'll walk through the menu real quick for you guys as well by pressing and holding the top of the turret. So right now what's pulling up is a little sun and moon symbol. Again, keep in mind in the bottom of the screen there is a moon symbol. If I go ahead and click this option, it's going to put me in daytime mode, and you'll see that the footage got really noisy because now I'm in day mode and the scope is essentially a lot less light sensitive in the daytime mode. So again, like I said, this is after sundown, and that's to be expected there. Pressing and holding the turret, it'll pop the menu back up. I'm going to go ahead and just pop it back into nighttime mode to clean that footage up a little bit for you guys. And then we're going to scroll over. There's a round on the menu, which is again where you can select your different profiles. You can see I currently have 3. I am going to just leave that on the 223 because that is currently what I have my rifle on. But just know you can have multiple zeroed profiles on here, which is always a nice feature. If you want to put this bad boy in a quick detach mount, you will be able to do so and switch it between your different setups. Now next is going to be your settings, which right now the Wi-Fi is on. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off just to save on battery life. I'm not currently needing to use the app. Going underneath that is the factory reset. Next is going to be your factory reset. Definitely don't want to do that right now. Here's where you adjust your screen brightness. By selecting that, you can scroll up or down. I'm going to leave it back on 25 because that's currently what I have my camera set to look hopefully good for you guys on the other end. And then you can also adjust your date and time. Up next is going to be the media. So it is possible to view your media within the scope, which is a nice feature should you want to go ahead and preview it without having to connect to the mobile app. Next is going to be your mode. Currently I'm in ballistic, but I can go ahead and go into traditional. And one thing that kind of does confuse me on this, so this is what they're calling traditional, but to me this looks more like what I would personally call a ballistic reticle, because you'll see if I'll zoom in real quick, you get all these nice crosshairs and hatch marks, and it's a nice first focal plane, essentially reticle that you can zoom in onto. Now, I'm going to talk about this later in the video, but if you are in this, what they call, again, traditional mode, you are not going to see the reticle when you export your photos and videos. So it is currently kind of a firmware flaw. Again, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but do be aware that I thought I'd address this in this portion of the video as well to give you a better understanding of what I'm going to be talking about later in my final thoughts on this Optic. Now up next, this little reticle is actually where you can change or choose different reticle colors and some basic variations in shapes and sizes for both of the reticle options for traditional or ballistic, depending on which side of the house you choose to go on. Now there is a sleep mode in the menu, which essentially will shut the display off, help you save some battery life, and it'll power the optic back on faster than just completely powering it down. And then there is a rangefinder function, which is a pretty useful feature. All you'll do is select that. Currently mine is set to off. So now with the rangefinder put on, you can either manually enter the height of an object if you know what it should be, or you can use some rough calculations for a white-tailed deer, elk, or moose, depending on what you may be on the hunt for. And essentially what that's going to do is give you that height on your reticle so that you have something to compare it to. So for example, let's say we're on an exciting elk hunt right now. I'm going to select that. And now you have the height of an elk. So based on that, that'll help you gauge how far away you are. So again, we have what the height of an elk should be at, and that's at 100 yards. Let's say the elk looks, a little bit too big. So there's a good chance we're further away. We'll go ahead and just change it to, 204 yards. Now see how that vertical height just got smaller. Essentially, that's going to help you fine-tune based on that height how far away you are by using that built-in rangefinder function, which is incredibly useful if you're going to be doing any kind of long-range shooting. And again, you do have the manual input, so if you have a known target height, if you and your buddies are putting out a target or you're shooting a different animal, you can, again, put the estimated height of your target in there so that you can, again, kind of fine-tune your range. So a very, very, creative and simple solution to get you some basic range estimates. And then if you're tired of seeing that on your reticle, just go back, turn rangefinder off, and it will be gone. And then we're back to where we started. So everything's pretty simple, pretty self-explanatory. It takes a little bit of playing with, but I feel like it's a pretty intuitive and a self-explanatory system. A handful of features, but nothing overly complicated within the Accufire Noctis TR1. Okay, so first and foremost, what you're going to need to do is obviously download the Accufire app, and then you'll need to go through the settings on the optic itself and make sure that the Wi-Fi is enabled. Once you have the Wi-Fi enabled and you select that network through your mobile device of choice, and open up the app, this is the first window you're going to see. So I am going to go ahead and hit connected device, and you'll see at the top of the screen it does have the Accufire Wi-Fi frequency up top. You'll also notice right next to that there is a little white plug symbol. You definitely want to make sure you see that. If that is red, that means you have a connection issue, which does happen from time to time, and the best workaround is to close out of the app and try again. That's been my best solution. You'll also notice I've put my phone into airplane mode. I will forget other networks temporarily just to make sure I have the best undisturbed connection. Also, I just didn't want notifications blowing up my phone while doing this for you guys, so bear with me on that. The app itself is pretty simple. You'll see everything is nice and clear, and this is more in line with what to expect your vision will be when looking through the optic. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to show you how clear things look when looking through the optic itself. You'll notice that it does indicate what power it's on in a little white circle on the right side of the screen. I can select that, which will open up this kind of drag and drop menu, so I can actually change the magnification from the app. There's about a half-second delay, so I'll crank it all the way to 23 power, and there you go. By the way, the scope isn't necessarily focused to what I'm looking at. I just didn't want you guys looking at a blank wall. So there you go, back out to the base magnification of 3.8 power when viewing through the app here. Now, the other thing I can do is hit this little button in the center, and you'll notice a counter just popped up, and by little button in the center I mean the blue circle, and now I'm actually recording a video, which is pretty convenient, and I'll hit that again and the recording will stop. I can hit the media icon in the bottom right and switch it from picture or video, and now if I hit the blue button, it'll take a photo and give you a notification saying that taking the photo was successful. So I'll go ahead and switch that back to the video mode. Now you can also go ahead and open up the settings in the top right, which will kind of allow you to do anything that you can see within the scope. You can also choose to access from outside the scope if you don't want to go through the menu within the scope. All the same options. Now, If you hit software upgrade, it says developing, and if you want to link to the manual, it says developing. So it kind of seems like there's some things in the works on this, and it's not fully complete per se, but for the most part, the functions are all there, what you need. So I also noticed a couple typos, which further makes me feel like it's kind of almost like a beta version. So setting is spelt wrong on top, and then day mode, they're missing an A. But nonetheless, you can see I'm toggling day mode on and off there. And I can also adjust the screen brightness from the app as well, or hit on the top to activate sleep. So a very, very basic app. It does function. There are a few kinks that I think need to be worked out, but nonetheless, just walking you through how it's currently set up. Now, the last thing you can do on the right side of the screen there's actually a little ruler symbol, so I can adjust the range as well. So would you have a rangefinder or something, you can input that, and then it'll help you with that ballistic calculation within the scope. Now, in the bottom left portion of the screen, the 9 squares there, that's your files. So you can go into either your photos or your videos. Now, I do want to point out that the only way to download the media off this is through this app, which means you cannot remove an SD card and plug it into your computer. You can also not currently tether the Optic to your computer. You have to go through the app. Now, I point this out because you see how many videos I have collected thus far for you guys for testing out this Optic and doing the review. This took a little over an hour to completely download through the Wi-Fi frequency of the Optic onto my mobile device. So it is kind of a pain. I would like to see either a removable SD card potentially in the future, or to be able to at least at the very minimum plug it into your computer as something I would like to see as an improvement. Nonetheless, again, the bare essential functions are there, and you can get your media off of your Optic. But you will notice, I'll go back to the videos, my crosshairs are all gone on these videos, and that is because I was in the traditional reticle mode, and I will talk about that a little bit more in detail in my overall thoughts and opinions on this Optic. But it is not a mistake that the reticle is currently missing. That's just unfortunately how the videos exported in the mode I was in. So again, more thoughts on that later, but just kind of walking you through some things there. Okay, so like I said, I have been using this now for about 5 months, a little over 5 months, so it's definitely been a long time coming on this Optic. That being said, that means I have a lot of thoughts and opinions and things, both good and bad, I've discovered on this Optic, and I'm going to go ahead and just disclose all those to you like I would any friend or family that may be approaching me asking if this is the right Optic for them. So let's start on a good note, all the good things about this Optic. When it came out of the box, I was actually pretty pleased. It feels very well made. It feels high quality. It doesn't feel, super cheap or light weight, like the material thickness itself and all that in the housing. It doesn't feel fragile. It feels very well made, and it looks good. Aesthetically, I love the form factor of this Optic. I don't like to throw electro optics on my rifle that are very clearly, not traditional optics. Call me old-fashioned, but I just like the way they look. In the the form factor you're used to, which they nailed it on this one. It looks very pleasing to me, personal opinion there, but the looks match the feel and the build quality. It feels like a solid Optic. I haven't had any issues in terms of the physical durability. Speaking which, I had an accidental drop test where from roughly shoulder height, this bad boy fell out of my shooting tripod as I was trying to loosen a little faster than I was anticipating. Life happens, Optic drops onto the concrete light dirt that we have here in South Texas. If you're from Texas, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The clay gets really packed down, and so this just fell right onto the ground with a fully loaded 20-round magazine on this 20-inch 5.56 setup. So decent amount of weight and force. The Optic was fine. Zero was held. No issues or otherwise concerns from that situation. So from a physical standpoint, it feels pretty good there. Now, in terms of the reliability that Accufire talks about, they, on some of their social media outlets and some videos they've put out, are claiming that they've actually used a 4570 on this Optic, and they've put over 1,000 rounds of 308 through it. Now, from my standpoint, I've only used this dedicated on this 5.56 setup. I've probably put a couple hundred rounds through it, and again, had that accidental drop test. As far as transporting it, I've pretty much thrown it in the back seat of my truck. It's bounced around, kind of rattled against some other rifles that may have been back there while scouting for wildlife on our property. So normal use and my accidental drop test, it's been fine in my experience. So I can't speak to higher calibers because that's how I tested it, was just with 5.56. But I have no reason to believe that, especially after a drop, that a higher caliber would be an issue. Moving our way inwards on reliability, the 0 was always maintained. I didn't have any questions or, really doubts on that, which is a big deal when we're talking about electro-optics. Now, in terms of the battery life itself, I never had an issue with it suddenly dying or quitting on me unexpectedly. It held right around that 10-hour ballpark that they advertise. Again, maybe add or take away an hour, hour and a half, either direction, depending on if I was using it more in the day or more at night. And on one final note, in terms of reliability, I did not have this optic freeze or do anything funky at any point in terms of, shutting down, image freezing, something not functioning, a button not responding. Electronically, this optic was completely good to go. Okay, so with all that said, I have had overall a very positive experience using this optic. I haven't questioned the reliability, but again, using it now coming on 5 months, there's some things that started stacking up and adding up that just kind of made me feel like this optic definitely needs some more polishing up on the firmware side of the house. I will, talk about these in more detail, but again, for this being, this whole package being listed at roughly $1,000, I feel like, it should definitely be a little bit more polished than it currently is. Essentially, this is going to work, it's going to function exactly how you need it to, but there's some things that can definitely be improved to just make it that much better of, more value for that price point. So I'm going to go ahead and get into some of that. For example, depending on if you watched the earlier portion of this video or not, there are 2 different reticle modes inside this optic. Now, if you take it right out of the box, it's going to be set to their traditional mode. So if you record your hunting or shooting in that traditional mode, you'll see your crosshairs obviously when looking through the optic, but when it comes time to looking at the exported footage, it's not going to export with the crosshair visible. Now for me, is it a deal breaker? Probably not, but it is a nuance that is somewhat frustrating because you can't critique where your shot placement was, how steady were you holding when the time, when the round broke off, etc. It is definitely a firmware issue. It's not a hardware issue. It could be improved in the future, but again, it's an example of something that should really be polished up, especially at the price point that this optic is coming in at the moment. Now, in terms of that reticle, again, another little nuance that I discovered is when you're still in that same traditional reticle mode, when you're zeroing it, you're limited to roughly a 1 MOA adjustment at a time, which is a pretty coarse adjustment for a rifle scope package. Now, if you switch over to the ballistic reticle mode, that problem goes away and you can make much more fine-tuned adjustments. So again, in my opinion, it's a firmware issue, some more of that polishing up or refining that are really needed on the firmware side of the house of this optic. The overall user interface of the app also seems a little bit like a very well prepared beta version. Like it's not completely finished. There's a couple features I do believe in the app that just say, coming soon or not yet available. Again, it is what it is. You get all the basic functionality that is needed to get the job done. But again, being that it is a $1,000 optic, which that price point, it's very real for a lot of us. Can be a very heavy investment as something you're putting on top of, a rifle you may have already spent decent money on as well. I feel like that should be a little bit more refined. Now, again, thankfully it is just a firmware thing and the basic needs are met. But again, just giving you my honest thoughts, I feel like the software definitely needs some improving in that regards. Now, in terms of the overall physical functions of the optic, I did notice that if you're not using the rear eye cup and you're shooting in bright sunlight, the screen leaves a little to be desired in terms of how bright it can get. Again, if you're in the worst case scenario condition of you're shooting into kind of the lowering sunset and that light is just blasting towards your direction, you will need to use the eye cup. So if you're someone who likes the clean, minimal setup like I do, just bring it along, throw it in a range bag, or just be prepared to, drape something over you to help you see the screen a little bit better. Fortunately, on the other side, the screen is able to get dim enough at night that you're not blinding yourself. So I think the screen could potentially get a little bit brighter in the future. But again, it got the job done, and if you bring the eye cup, it'll be just right. But just keep that in mind as well. Now, on the subject of light and light sensitivity, I was actually kind of surprised here with this optic. So this is the stock IR illuminator that comes with it. And in my personal use with a sample size of 1, I was limited to roughly 120, maybe 150 yards of visibility with the stock illuminator on high in the fully focused beam. Now, what I've used in the past is right here. This is just roughly a $65 aftermarket. I believe it's Evolva Technology, I'm assuming very knockoff illuminator that I've used with other digital night vision devices successfully to be able to see out to roughly 400 yards in optimal air conditions. You know, not a lot of dust in the air, humidity is relatively low, so I'm not getting a lot of reflection. Nonetheless, when using this, just to confirm that, you know, maybe this is just very underpowered, I was still limited to maybe 150 to now 175 yards at night, so not a whole lot better, which made me start thinking that this guy is an infrared light hog. It really just needs a lot of IR light illumination to get the full potential out of it. Now, if you get something like this, which is the Sniper Hog Lights Coyote cannon, which is the absolute brightest IR illuminator that I'm currently aware of on the commercial market, at least right now, that was able to push this guy to its full potential so far that I've discovered, and I was able to see out to 960 yards approximately is what I measured on Google Earth. And I'm not saying you're going to see things absolutely crystal clear. You're going to see some pretty basic outlines of things. You'll be able to detect movement and motion. So way more range than what you need for night vision. Again, if you're shooting long range with night vision, that's kind of interesting. You really got to be careful because, you know, where the IR illumination isn't hitting, you lose your backdrop and, you know, the principles of gun safety, all that. We won't get into that. So this paired with this optic will be more than what you need, in my opinion. But you do need the most, you know, the strongest illumination possible to unlock the potential of this optic. So in my experience, again, with a sample size of 1, this is not the absolute most sensitive digital night vision device that I've currently used, but I was very pleased with how it did once you pair it with a powerful IR illumination tool. So depending on what you have in your arsenal, or just, you know, keep in mind that you may need to invest in another piece of gear. So kind of circling back to my initial point that I was making here is this right out of the box is going to give you essentially what you need just to get the job done. There are some areas that I think still need some improvement, and the biggest one, you need a strong IR illuminator. So would it be up to me? I would say maybe Accufire can consider providing a brighter one as a, you know, in the, you know, right out of the box, or maybe just exclude it altogether, so and potentially lower the price of the optic so that you can put those savings towards an IR illuminator of your choice. So anyways, all that to say, my overall thoughts on this optic, my biggest consideration with an electric optic is, can I trust it? Is it reliable? Will it hold zero? Is it going to die on me? And reliability wise, this thing has done a great job. Now, like I said, it's got some areas where it needs refinement. And the only reason I want to point that out in terms of it needing polishing up and refinement is because it does come in at $1,000. So therefore, I'm going to critique it with that in mind. Now, if, for example, if they were selling this for $500, I'd say it's an absolutely, you know, out of the park exceptional buy. But the reality is they want $1,000 for this, which again is a pretty big investment for most of us. So do I think it's worth $1,000? Well, again, my answer is actually going to be yes. I do believe that it's a fair buy for $1,000, and you'll be very happy with it, especially if you are not used to using night vision or thermal devices. So keep in mind that I've used a handful of devices in this price range, so I'm going to be a little bit more nitpicky, but I hope to be nitpicky on behalf of you who may be potentially watching this so that you kind of know things to consider. Now, I will say that optics that have cost even more than this, I've had freeze, you know, digital optics that just, you know, you almost had to cross your fingers that it wasn't going to die really fast or freeze or have some kind of error or issue internally. This is not one of those optics. And for me, again, with electro optics, that is the biggest thing. So I know that if this is, you know, in the gun safe and I need to grab it and use it for a hunt at night, it's going to be ready to go. And that is a big deal. So much so that I would be willing to kind of wait for some of the firmware bugs to be worked out a little bit or improved, just to improve on the overall user interface. As it stands as a rifle scope, it's going to get the job done, and for most of us that is priority number one. So therefore I can actually recommend this. Would a friend or family member approach me asking me for suggestions of the different night vision optics around the $1,000 mark, this would definitely be one of the ones on the list that I would in fact recommend. And like I said, keep in mind, if you do want to try one of these out for yourself or invest in one, you can use discount code 4MR for 5% off. So other than that, if there's anything I didn't address in this video that you do have a question on, please leave it in the comment section below. I do try to be as responsive as possible. If you found this video helpful, please do consider subscribing. That really helps me out, again, in the day and age where YouTube just does not like the Second Amendment community. Anything or you can do to support the channel, simple as liking this video or subscribing, it really does help more than you guys think. And on that note, I'd really like to thank you for stopping by and watching this video. And as always, have a good one.